Alright, so let's start with the materials you're going to be using today. So regardless if you signed up for the beach themed wreath or if you signed up for the Summer's Bounty floral wreath, you're going to be using very similar materials, just in different colors. So to start, you're going to need your wreath frame and you're going to need some pipe cleaners. And I recommend, since we're using 2 colors of Deco mesh, which is this material here, I recommend having 2 colors of pipe cleaners as it helps you kind of pre-plan where that Deco mesh is going to go. And it helps you to make sure it's evenly distributed before you start putting everything onto your wreath frame. Then you're going to be needing Deco mesh. Again, we chose 2 colors for this wreath. And you're going to be needing ribbon. Now for this wreath, I chose 3 colors of ribbon. For a small wreath like this, I wouldn't recommend much more than 3 to 4 colors. On a large wreath, I would probably use 4 to 5 colors. But since this one's small, we picked 3 different colors. Now, it's important for your ribbon to somewhat match your Deco mesh well. And then typically, I recommend 2-inch ribbon here. However, you can use 1.5-inch or 1-inch ribbon. You just have to sometimes use a little bit more of it than you would on this. And the last thing you're going to need for these type of wreath in particular is going to be decorations. So this is our main focus for our wreaths this summer. Is going to be picking decorations and designing the wreath around that. So obviously for a beach themed wreath, we're going to want lots of seashells. And so that's going to be our main focus. So I actually picked out my seashells first, and then I found Deco mesh that was going to match the theme and actually picked my ribbon based off of that. So I'll walk you through how to choose ribbon and Deco mesh when you're using a decoration as your main feature. Like with our beach themed wreath, we are going to need a wreath frame and 2 colors of pipe cleaners since we have 2 colors of Deco mesh. And I went ahead and picked out 3 2-inch ribbons for this particular wreath. And then again, our main feature is going to be designing our wreaths around decoration. So the main decoration for this particular wreath is our Summer's Bounty flowers. And then these are some extra little, just kind of supplemental flowers that we're going to be adding in at the very, very end. As you can imagine, this is way too many single items to put onto one wreath, but we will be breaking it down and using just a few flowers. Obviously, we'll use this flower and these ones, and then just a tiny bit of these ones. Because if you use too much decorations, it can really make your wreath look too busy and cluttered. So we want to avoid that. So I'll be dividing this up to make it smaller little bits to fit a small wreath. So when starting with decorations for a wreath, it's very important to pick out the most of the decorations that you're going to plan on using. Now, I might go back in and add a sand dollar or something afterwards, but right now, I know that my main decorations are going to be something that looks similar to this. And these are all either white or cream colored with a little bit of maybe some orange or some pink. But this is the main amount of decorations that I'm going to use. Now obviously I'm not going to use all of these. This is a little too much for any single wreath. I'll probably use this for my centerpiece, maybe 2 of these, maybe 1 or 2 of these, and maybe 1 or 2 of these. So you're really not going to use all of this materials. I am going to break this up for the kit. But it's very easy then, especially with a theme like this, to pick out your Deco mesh. So for a beach themed wreath, I need something that represents sand and I need something that represents water. So I went ahead and went with this kind of teal color because I liked that it had light blue and dark blue both kind of shimmering about. And then once you have your Deco mesh, you can pick out your ribbon. So I liked this because it was very seashell-y and had an anchor and it was blue. It matched my Deco mesh. I like this one because it had some sea animals on it. And it's got some burlap, which looks very nice with this ribbon here. This kind of looks like something you might find on like a ship out at the ocean. And everything as a general, when I have it all together, matches. There's nothing that really clashes. It all looks very nice together. So I'm going to go ahead and use this as my main amount of decorations and Deco mesh and ribbon that I'm going to go ahead and add into this wreath. So likewise with the Summer's Bounty wreath, I started with the flowers. And I picked out this dahlia first because I thought that would be a beautiful centerpiece. And then I found some marigolds and sunflowers that both match very well. And those are both summer flowers, so it fits our theme perfectly. And then I found these natural stems that I'm going to be able to add on and add just a little bit more definition to our wreath here. So these are, I'm not going to use much of them. I'm going to use just a few here and there. But it's going to give the wreath some contrast to these faux flowers. And similarly, I picked the burgundy Deco mesh because it's on the same color scale as our dahlia here. It's just a little bit darker. And I picked out this striped black and beige Deco mesh. Now I picked these darker Deco meshes because my flowers are so bright. So this is going to give it some contrast that the wreath needs. And then I liked this green ribbon because it looks very nice with the leaves, and I'm going to be using these leaves. I might cut some off and actually glue it to the underside of one of these flowers so that you can see it. Some flowers, the leaves might be close enough that you don't need to do that, but definitely use a few leaves in your wreath. And then I picked out this ribbon because it ties in very nicely to this Deco mesh, and this one was just a very neat pattern. It doesn't really clash with any of the other patterns. It's going to stand out nicely, and it has just a pop of color. So this, like I said, this is going to be very dark, but because we have very bright flowers and a very bright ribbon, it's not going to clash. It's going to stay a nice, just kind of balance of light and dark within the wreath. Alright, so I've got my materials here to start cutting my Deco mesh. You are going to need a good pair of scissors and a tape measure for this. For a small wreath, I'm going to go ahead and cut my Deco mesh to right around 16 inches. Deco mesh does stretch a little bit, so even if you cut it right at 16 inches, once you're done cutting, it might be a little bit bigger or a little bit smaller. That is completely fine. Also a note, if you are making a medium or large wreath, a medium wreath you would cut your Deco mesh to about 24 inches, and a large wreath you would cut it to about 30 inches. But for a small wreath here, I'm going to stick to 16 inches. You can cut it a little bit longer. That will add more volume. But the risk you're going to take with cutting it longer is going to be it bunching up and possibly making it harder to hang up. So if you want a wreath that has a lot more volume, definitely go ahead and cut this a bit longer. But if you want one that's just got a nice amount of volume for hanging up, then I would stick close to 16 to 18 inches. Something you're going to notice while you're cutting your Deco mesh is that it rolls up. That's because it's so tightly wound around the piece of cardboard here in the center. And especially as you get closer and closer to the end of your Deco mesh, it is going to become much more tightly rolled. That is all right. You do not need to iron it out or anything like that. Actually, it makes it a lot easier to get some extra volume in your wreath when it curls up like this. So go ahead and once you cut, just leave it the way it is. It'll work perfectly fine. So as you're cutting your Deco mesh, you need to look at how many pipe cleaners you have. For a small wreath here, I've got 15, so I'm going to need to cut 15 pieces of Deco mesh. Now, that is going to mean that one of these colors is going to have one more piece than the other. It's completely up to you if you have an odd number of pipe cleaners, which one has the extra piece. Oftentimes, I'll see how much of each Deco mesh I have and decide from there. But if you just bought brand new Deco mesh, you can decide which one has the extra piece. If you have an even number of pipe cleaners, then you'll just cut an exact same amount of each of these. So I'm going to go ahead and cut 7 of one color and 8 of the other. Alright, so I've got all my Deco mesh cut. And again, when you cut your Deco mesh, it's likely to kind of have a little bit of variance in exactly how long you cut it. So some of these might be closer to 15 inches. After I've cut it, some of these might be closer to 16 inches long, some might be 16 and a half inches, just because of the way Deco mesh kind of stretches and shrinks. And one other thing I want to point out about Deco mesh is that the pieces will like to stick together. So if you have a piece like this, it's going to stick together. So if that happens, just gently untangle it and it'll come back apart. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and explain how I put these pipe cleaners on this wreath frame. So the first thing you have to decide when you're putting your pipe cleaners on your wreath frame is which of these rows to use along the frame. Typically for a small wreath, I will use the 2 center ones, just because I find that the 2 outside ones on a small wreath tend to kind of want to turn behind the wreath, which makes it a lot harder to hang up once it's finished. So I'll usually use these 2 center ones. And one of the easiest ways I have found to make sure your pipe cleaners are nicely spaced if you're color coding a wreath is to actually alternate the colors along your row. Now, when you're doing a smaller frame like this, you're going to have 5 sections for this particular wreath frame, and you're going to have 3 pieces of Deco mesh per section, which means you're going to have a total of 15 pipe cleaners. And that means that since it's an odd number, you are going to have 2 of the pipe cleaners of the same color that are next to each other at some point, and that's fine. As long as for the most part they are all nicely spaced, it is totally fine to have two colors next to each other. And you'll find that with a small wreath like this, it's actually pretty much impossible when you have only two colors to not have the same color next to each other. So like right here, I've got silver and silver next to each other, but one's on the outside and one's on the inside, and it's immediately followed by gold on either side. So it's not going to look like all of your one colors over here and all of the other colors over here, which is definitely something you can do if that's what you want. But if you're trying to space out the colors, this is the best way to do that. You can see it goes silver, gold, silver, gold, silver, gold, silver, gold, all the way around. The inside there are those two golds next to each other, but the rest also alternate. And when you use each row like that, and rather than looking at each section, it really is the easiest way to make sure your pipe cleaners are spaced. Right, so now that my pipe cleaners are all on the wreath frame, I'm actually going to go ahead and hot glue them all down. Now, you don't have to hot glue them down, but I do find it makes it a lot easier to assemble, because if you twist them several times around to secure it to the frame, but they're still able to move pretty easily around this frame. And what I found is when you put on like a piece of Deco mesh here, it actually pushes it away from a Deco mesh piece here and can push these really close together, making it very easy to miss a pipe cleaner. And it is a lot harder to go back in after you've put your wreath together and add Deco mesh and ribbon than it is to catch it in the same step. So I always recommend hot gluing it down just so that it's easier as you're going through each step to make sure that you haven't missed any of your pipe cleaners. So a note I always like to make whenever I'm hot gluing my pipe cleaners onto the frame is that it looks like it's nice and secured on this side, but if you flip it over, you can see that it actually doesn't go all the way around yet. So I always also recommend flipping over your wreath frame and hot gluing the pipe cleaners on the other side as well. What that does is actually make a bead of glue that goes all the way around the wreath frame, which makes it a little bit harder for the glue to actually kind of break off and let your pipe cleaner just kind of move back and forth. It makes it a lot harder for that to happen just from a little bump. Now, if I were to use some force, I could still get this to come off the wire wreath frame. So if you need to move one after you've glued it, that definitely is something you can do. But this kind of holds them in place a little bit better than if they were just kind of loose on the frame itself. Alright, so since my Deco mesh is cut and my wreath frame is ready to go, I'm ready to put some Deco mesh on my wreath. So the first thing you're going to do is check to see how many pieces of each color Deco mesh you have. For my wreath, I've got 8 pieces of this striped color and 7 pieces of this, which means that my red is going to correspond to the 7 silver pipe cleaners I have, and my striped is going to correspond to my 8 gold pipe cleaners. And very similarly for the beach themed wreath, I have got 7 pieces of beige Deco mesh here, and I've got 8 pieces of blue or teal, and that's going to correspond on my wreath. The blue is going to correspond to the silver pieces, which is 8 of those, and then the 7 gold pieces will correspond to my sand colored Deco mesh. So then when you're ready to put your Deco mesh onto your wreath frame, the easiest way to do it is to pinch it in the center here, and just kind of walk your fingers up the center until you reach the other end. And what that does is create a nice kind of puffy piece of Deco mesh. And you're going to take this piece and put it right in the center of one of the pipe cleaners and twist the pipe cleaners tightly around the center of that Deco mesh a few times. But go ahead and leave the pipe cleaners sticking up. That way you can use them for your ribbon in the next step as well. This is what it should look like when you're done. You can see I still have my pipe cleaner sticking up so I can easily see it when it's time for a ribbon. And I'm going to go ahead and repeat that process all the way around the wreath frame, alternating with the red and the stripes. One last note I wanted to make about Deco mesh was that this is 10-inch Deco mesh. This is my favorite to work with because it is kind of like the cleanest Deco mesh. There aren't a whole lot of strings that will come off. You'll notice, you'll probably see on yours, they'll have little strings like these come off, and this will only have it from the edges that you cut. They also make 21-inch wide Deco mesh, which is usually the exact same price as this 10-inch and the exact same length, which means you can get double the amount for the same price oftentimes. However, you have to cut it in half, which means you're going to have 3 sides that could potentially have these little strings coming off of. So that's just something that's up to you. 21-inch Deco mesh is used a lot for a different technique. We're using the ruffle technique on this Deco mesh wreath. There's also one where you weave the Deco mesh in and out of the wreath frame, which 21-inch Deco mesh is frequently used for. But I have found you can cut it in half. It's just a lot more cleanup at the very end where you're getting rid of these little strings. So regardless of which wreath theme you chose, you are going to go ahead and alternate your colors of Deco mesh onto the corresponding pipe cleaners. So this is what it will look like after you have two pieces on, and I'll show you what it looks like after both wreaths have all of the Deco mesh assembled. Alright, all my Deco mesh is now on my wreaths. So one thing you're going to do at this point is kind of look at your wreath and see if you can find any spots like this where there's a giant gap. You're just going to want to take your Deco mesh and kind of rearrange it, twist it around, kind of just give it a nice little fluff, and that will help to hide some of those larger gaps. So I'm going to go ahead and go around each of these wreaths and look for any spots like here where this red is really buried, and I'm going to try and kind of just move it around so that way it looks nice and evenly distributed. Alright, those look a lot better. So one thing I wanted to point out real fast is that Deco mesh wreaths are really see-through when you're holding them up to light, but as you can see, when you put it over a solid surface, you can't really see through it as much, and some of those spots you can still kind of see through. We're going to cover up with some ribbon and then decorations. Alright, so I'm going to go ahead and cut my ribbon. If you are making one of these on your own, you can either do this after you prep your Deco mesh, or you could do it after you put the Deco mesh on your wreath. It doesn't really matter either way. I recommend doing your ribbon before you start assembling your wreath if you're planning on doing it in multiple settings. But if you're planning on doing your wreath all at once, it doesn't really matter. So, like I said, for your ribbon, I usually use 2-inch ribbon, but the exception is going to be this time I'm going to use this 1-inch ribbon here. So I'm going to cut my ribbon to 10 inches for a small wreath. If I was doing a large wreath, I would cut these to 12 inches. But I'm going to go ahead and just cut these ones to 10 inches with the exception of my 1-inch ribbon. I'm going to cut this to about 10.5 to 11 inches just so it sticks out a little bit more. On a small wreath, you can cut these to 12 inches, but like this one is going to, it's going to really pop out of your wreath, and it's going to just kind of stand out a little bit more, which we don't really need since we're using so many decorations on this particular wreath. So I'm going to go ahead and just cut these to 10 inches. Of course, all the ribbon in your kit was already pre-cut for you, either to all to 10 inches if you have the Summer's Bounty wreath, or to 10 inches with the exception of this one at about 10.5 inches if you had the beach-themed wreath. So you are going to have 10 pieces of each color ribbon, since we have 15 pipe cleaners, and each pipe cleaner is going to have 2 pieces of ribbon. So you're going to need to cut a total of 30 pieces. And so whenever I have a nice number like that that's easily divisible, I always try to pick the number of ribbon that matches that. So in this case, if I have 3 colors of ribbon and I need 30 pieces, I know I just need to cut 10 pieces of each. If you don't have a number that's easily divisible like that, then you'll just need to maybe cut an extra piece or 2 of your ribbon. I'm going to go ahead and cut 10 pieces of each color, and then I will start the video back once that's done. Alright, so I have 30 pieces for each theme, and that's 10 of each pattern per theme, and this is wired ribbon that I have cut out. So now we're ready to move on to the next step. Alright, and so a classic look for wired ribbon, especially in a Deco mesh wreath, is this kind of chevron triangle cut out of your ribbon. And how you do that is you fold your ribbon in half so that it's nice, it's like a narrow strip, and you're going to cut from the fold up to the corner. So let me pause the video, I'll cut this and show what it looks like. Alright, so after you cut your ribbon, it's going to look like this, and when you unfold it, you're going to be able to see that that triangle now has been cut out of your ribbon. You're going to flip your ribbon over and repeat on the other side, and you're going to do this for all of your ribbon. So I'm going to go ahead and pause the video again and go ahead and finish cutting out this ribbon. If you have the beach themed wreath, it's up to you if you want to cut this particular ribbon to have that little shape in the end. As you can see, you can see it, but it's not that visible. So if you want to leave this one squared, that's perfectly fine. Alright, so at this point all of my ribbon has been cut and finished, so it's got that nice triangle shape in it, and it's ready to go on the Deco Mesh wreath. One thing I wanted to point out is that since you have 3 different colors of ribbon and 15 spots they're going to be going on, you can actually have a nice distribution of your ribbon throughout your wreath. So you have 3 potential patterns for either wreath option that you chose. And what you can do is just kind of start with one option, then use the next one, and then use the third option, and go all the way around your wreath. And that is the easiest way to make sure that your ribbon is perfectly distributed around your wreath. So I'm going to go ahead and show you how to put the ribbon on the Deco Mesh wreath. Alright, so I like to cross 2 pieces of ribbon over each other at a slight angle, such as that, and then pinch it together in the center. This makes it very easy to see both of the ribbons, and then you can also have, it's a lot easier to fluff it after this has been put on the Deco Mesh wreath if they're not covering the other. And it also means you can see both of them really well. So once you've got it pinched here in the center, you just look for an open pipe cleaner like this one here. Make sure you put your ribbon between the 2 pieces of pipe cleaner, and you're going to twist the pipe cleaner a few times to secure it. At this point, I also like to thread the pipe cleaner back through to the back of the wreath frame. So let me show you what it looks like once it is ready to go. So if you flip this over and take a look, it's a lot easier to make sure you've gotten all of your pipe cleaners because you can easily see where the hot glue marks are. And that will also let you see exactly where you've missed one, because I'll be able to tell that this pipe cleaner here and this glue mark here go together. So this one has been used. Alright, so both of my wreaths have one set of ribbon on it. I'm going to go ahead and stop recording and go ahead and put the rest of my ribbon on. If you'd like to pause the video while you put the ribbon on your Deco Mesh, that's perfectly fine. Go ahead and restart when you're ready to move on. Alright, so all the ribbon is on both of my wreaths here. You are going to want to at some point go through and kind of straighten up the ribbon. There is a wire in this ribbon to help it hold its shape, but I would actually recommend waiting until after putting on the decorations, just because when you flip your wreath over, it's going to re-squish all of the ribbon that you just fluffed. So I would go ahead and just see if there's any that are like really tucked in, like this little guy here, and then kind of fix those, but don't worry about really fluffing your wreath until after you've gotten some decorations on it. Alright, so I think we're ready to move on to decorations. Alright, so I'm ready to prep my decorations for my wreaths. I'm going to start with the beach themed wreath. I have got about 7 little decorations here. They're all seashells, and I wouldn't do much more than 7 small pieces on a small wreath. Now, decorations are really where your price of a wreath can skyrocket, because there's so many awesome decorations out there, but they typically are the most expensive portion of a wreath. So these came from different packs that had lots of different shells in it, and I just picked my favorite. So what I'm going to need to do, though, is because this doesn't have anything to attach it to the wreath with, I'm going to need to take a hot glue gun and hot glue some of this floral wire onto the wreath. So it's really simple to do. I always like just to put just a little bead of glue on there, and then stick the floral wire right into that glue. Make sure it's nice and covered, and I oftentimes will actually go ahead and cover it with a little bit more glue as well. Lots of glue. Alright, I'm going to go ahead and let that dry and repeat that process on the rest of my shells. Alright, so for the Summer's Bounty wreath, all of the decorations have stems on them, since it's a floral themed wreath, so that we don't need to hot glue any floral wire to this, but our flowers have some really pretty leaves that come with them. They just aren't high enough on the stem to be able to be seen. So what I'm going to do is actually pull off the leaves off of the flower, and I'm going to glue them so that they kind of just sit right underneath the top of the flower. That way that they can be seen once we are putting them on the wreath. So I'm just going to put a dot of glue right here on the base of that flower, and I'm just going to stick the flower gently on it, just like that. It doesn't have to be pretty. You're not going to see this portion of the flower. What you are going to see is that portion. So I'm going to put one more leaf over on the opposite side and repeat that on my other flowers. Completely up to you how many leaves you want to use. I did go ahead and put 2 on each of my sunflowers because I thought that looked really well balanced. My marigolds, one of them has 2 leaves. I put 1 leaf on one and I left this one without any leaves. And for the dahlia, it's already a pretty large flower. It's going to be my centerpiece. And I just don't think the leaves that came with the stem quite are big enough to put them on there. So I'm actually going to leave my dahlia without any leaves. So go ahead and glue those on and let them dry completely before putting it on the wreath. So when it comes to arranging your decorations, it's completely up to you. As you can see, I made my dahlia my centerpiece, but I did slightly put it off to the side and not directly in the very center of the wreath. It's completely up to you. Both look very nice. I do like to do groups of 3 for my decorations. I think that's one of the best ways to make a wreath look very well balanced. So you can see I have one group here of just the dahlia. I have a little grouping here with 2 of the marigolds and a sunflower, and I have a sunflower and a marigold up here. And so I think this looks very nice. And so I'm going to go ahead and get some of my more natural looking, the wheat and the extra little flowers and just kind of put them in around the edges just to make this look very full. And then there is the beach themed wreath. Again, I started with my centerpiece. I put it in the center and then just slightly off to the side. Then I used my anchor here because I wanted it to be somewhat centered too. And then I just kind of went around and filled in a few of the spots around the side. And so now the easiest thing to do is you're going to have to flip this wreath over. That way you can hot glue it and secure all of your decorations to the back. One of the best things you can do at this point is make sure that the wire on your beach themed wreath, or if you're doing the Summer's Bounty wreath, the stems of your flowers are actually tucked into and wrapping around your wire wreath frame. That will keep them from sliding off. Obviously, if you have the beach themed wreath, these are a little delicate. You don't want to drop them. So if they fall off and fell onto the floor, there is a chance that they could break. So I always recommend taking a towel or a blanket and draping it over your wreath. That way it holds everything in place. And then after you flip it over, it actually keeps any little strings or pieces of, fluff or from the ribbon from actually getting onto the surface, and it keeps it all in that towel. So I highly recommend an old towel or blanket to flip this over. So I'm going to check to make sure all my wire is in the wreath frame. That'll make my life a lot easier because I'll be able to see where I need to hot glue the wire frame. And likewise with the Summer's Bounty wreath, I'm going to double check that my stems are in the wire frame. And one more point I wanted to make before you flip over your wreaths is that, especially on the Summer's Bounty wreath here, where you've got pieces of like this natural flowers that are very delicate, you definitely want them to be off to the side. That way when you flip it over, the weight of your wreath isn't on these delicate pieces. Another note, I did trim up the length of the stems on these, especially on the wheat. They were a little bit long, and so I didn't want a stem coming all the way through to the opposite side. So I did trim those down before putting them in this wreath. But now that all the decorations are on my wreath, I'm going to go ahead and flip it over and show you how to finish off your wreath. Alright, and here's the back side of my Summer's Bounty wreath. I do always make the point that you want to make sure you've tucked everything into your wreath frame. That way you've got 2 contact points. That is going to be the most secure way to hot glue down everything on your wreath. So I'm going to go ahead and hot glue anywhere that I see a stem touching the wreath frame, and you can hot glue stuff to the Deco mesh if you need to. I'm actually going to recommend doing that with your seashells if you have the beach themed wreath. You can also hot glue down the pipe cleaners if you wish. That's a little bit more optional. If you twisted them securely enough that they're not going to come loose, you don't really need to. But if you were barely able to get it around the Deco mesh and ribbon and twist it, then I would recommend hot gluing it just to make sure it doesn't come undone. But really anywhere that you see on the back of this wreath, one of your decorations making a contact with the Deco mesh of the frame, go ahead and hot glue that down. Alright, and I just flipped over my beach wreath, so I'm going to go through and hot glue as many contact points on these wires that are connecting my decorations as possible. You can kind of see them right here, kind of drifting over and under all of the different wire rows of our wreath frame. So I would highly recommend wrapping those wires around the frame as many times as possible, because the more contact points you have, the more secure it's going to be. And then after we have those all glued down and they're dry and ready to flip the wreath back over, I'll show you a little trick to help further secure your fragile decorations to the front. All right, and I just flipped my Summer's Bounty wreath back over. So I'm gonna go through now, and this is when I'm going to kind of straighten up the ribbon, refluff some of the deco mesh. Again, be careful as these pieces, if you choose to use them, are delicate. As always, you are welcome to use as much or as few of the materials included in your kit as you would like. You are more than welcome to substitute anything else out that you would like better. It's completely up to you. This is just a base set of supplies to make this particular wreath. I'm also going to go through and look for any little stringy pieces off of the deco mesh that can be chopped now. As you move your wreath around, you'll start getting a few more of those that pop up. But otherwise, here is the finished Summer's Bounty wreath. And likewise, I just flipped over my beach-themed wreath, and I'm going to go through and, just like with the other wreath, fluff up my ribbon and deco mesh, look for any little stringy pieces like this that I can cut off. And what I'm going to actually do is take my hot glue gun and put just a dot of glue underneath my decorations. That way they're also secured to the deco mesh itself. And that is just one extra layer of security to keep your fragile decorations from falling off your wreath. Here's another one of those little stringy pieces I'll need to trim. But I would highly recommend making sure your ribbon and deco mesh are how you would like it to look before gluing down the decorations, because it is a little bit harder to, like if you have a piece of ribbon over top of something and then after you've glued it, it is a lot harder to tuck it underneath. So go ahead and make sure your ribbon and deco mesh is where you would like it, and then do just a small dot of glue underneath your decorations to secure them to your wreath. All right, and there is our finished beach themed wreath.